The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So I'm sure a few people will tune in the next minute or so, but let's get started. So what is the retirement journey? In many ways, what I was brought to my attention, a lot of people think of retirement as an event and then you live your life. But I would like to suggest that it ought to be something, stop thinking about retirement as an event or something you simply save money for, and really think more about around questions as discovering what's next for your life and to a certain degree, the kind of person you want to be going forward. So I'd like to step back for a moment and just talk about our stories. This is me on the left and my partner, Jack Beauregard, who founded the business. And how we came together is sort of a funny story, but my own story is I had a long career in the corporate world. I then started a company in 2001. We were building an analytics engine for the retail world, which is where I cut my teeth. We got the beta done and we went out to raise money, and then September 2001 happened. And unfortunately, we were unable to ever close any of the funds we were looking at raising. So I ended up shutting that business and was definitely a case of identity crisis after that. A short while later, I got involved in the golf industry and the instruction side, not being an instructor, but helped take a business, and we got that going. Eventually, I sold my interest in that in 2008, which is how I ended up meeting Jack, or I like to say this is a story of a beach, a bear, and a phone call. So I had sold my interest in the company. The wire had hit my bank account, which for those of you who've ever done that is a really beautiful feeling. It was June of 2008. I was sitting on my favorite beach, having a drink from my favorite bottle of beer and watching the sunset. And then my phone buzzed. And I listened to the voicemail. It was a message from Greg, a friend in the old business. And Greg said, "Gee, Paul, I'm just calling to congratulate you. Obviously very sorry that you're leaving, but hope it's really a good move for you, and hopefully it makes you happy as you move on. I only have one question. What are you going to do next?" So I looked at the phone and I swore and I said, "Thanks, Greg. You just killed my buzz." But it was really a good question to ask because I had done an awful lot of thinking about what I wanted to do next. Somebody I knew from a previous life called me and said, "Hey, can you help us with a product launch?" So I said, "Fine, it's cash. Cash is beautiful." But I didn't think the product was going to do very well, and ultimately it did not, sadly. And I knew that contract was going to come to an end. So I was advised to go to a local networking organization called the Exit Planning Exchange that deals with all the advisors to business owners and what they need to do if they're going to exit. Well, I'd already exited, but I was told I might meet some interesting people there, and lo and behold, I sat down next to this distinguished gentleman, Jack Beauregard. So Jack asked me a question. He said, "Gee, Paul, what do you do?" And, I'm a sales and marketing guy. So I said, "Well, I help companies grow faster. Is that something you're interested in?" And Jack said, "Well, maybe." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" He says, "Well, you know how people get to a point in life where maybe they leave their career or perhaps they've sold their company and then they don't really know what they're going to do next?" And I kind of laughed and I said, "Yeah, I know that feeling." Of course, it was exactly what I was going through. And Jack said, "Well, I have a process to help people figure that out." So we exchanged cards. We said, "Let's meet for coffee." And over the course of a year of just sort of meeting for coffee and getting to know each other and getting an understanding, he started sharing his story. Well, he had also had a corporate career in sales. He also had started a company and ultimately left it. And so we had these interesting parallels. In his case, he came from the world of selling medical hips and knees, the medical business, as it were. He had his own business distributing that, one of the first ones in the country to do so outside of the big name brands. Throughout his life, he had some interesting transitions. He'd been married relatively young, had a child relatively young, got divorced relatively young. Years later, he met another woman, had another child, he had this business, and yet something was going on in his life that he didn't feel it was all connected, it wasn't all right. So fortunately, he was given an opportunity to study and do research at the Harvard Divinity School. He lives in Cambridge. And through his studies and through his work, he started to evolve what really has become these 7 principles for how to live an authentic life. And it was in many ways very fortuitous because tragically his wife became seriously ill with cancer. And she ended up dying and leaving him with a young child, his son, from this second marriage to raise alone. So in the process of mourning and understanding what he needed to do, he made a promise to his wife right before she passed away that he would write a book about this. And it took him a number of years later. He ended up remarrying for the third time, a wonderful woman who helped him raise his son. And she encouraged him to write that first book, which sadly is no longer in print, but it's called The Power of Balance. And so as I was meeting Jack and we were sort of converging, he really hit upon the fact that, sometimes the universe brings you exactly what you need at the right time if you're open to it. So when we decided to start collaborating in 2009, we took his experiences, my experiences, and slowly built what you're going to learn about today is a whole series of programs and methodology. We've also trained people all over the world to implement these programs and methodology. So let's move on. I was doing some research one time to see how long do people live? And it's really interesting. For most of human history, going all the way back to the beginning of Homo sapiens, the average human being only lived about 30 to 40 years. And it took about to the mid-20th century for the average human globally to live to their 50s. Today, globally, people live to their 60s or 70s. In rich countries like the United States, for example, or most of Western Europe, people live into their 70s and 80s. And in a small group of rich countries with really good diets, such as Scandinavia, Japan, and a few others, people can expect from birth to live well into their 80s. And so there's sort of a conflict here because the retirement concept was designed around people living until, their 50s or 60s and then sort of dying off, having those few short good years. But that's actually no longer the case. And it's this whole concept of retirement in the course of human history is really a relatively new phenomenon. So this was a study done by the U.S. Department of Labor released last year, and they looked at people over a period of years and how do the people spend their time, and they actually filled out minutes that they were doing different activities. And what they learned from that is that people spend on age 45 plus roughly 8 hours of work, 7 hours of sleep, and 9 hours for everything else, which pretty much makes sense when you think about it. But when they asked people who had retired how they spend their time, they reported spending a little more time sleeping, about 8 hours, which I'm kind of personally excited about. And then they spend about 6 hours watching TV and movies, and then 10 hours for the rest. So think about that. They've taken their 8 hours of work, sort of moved that over to sleep, and then they've replaced rather with their work, 8 hours of work, with about 6 hours of watching TV and movies, which kind of repels me because the whole idea is I want to have a more meaningful, purposeful life. I don't think I'm going to do that watching TV and movies. So the question I ask, well, geez, is maybe retirement a big fat lie? We work and slave away. There's Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, and then, of course, there's the concept of the golden years. You just sail off into the sunset. But, maybe that's not reality. Maybe that's not how people actually are living their lives, how we're living our lives. It's certainly not the norm, the course of human history. This is a relatively new concept, retirement. So I want to share 3 stories. First is Jane. So Jane was a stay-at-home mom for many years, and when her youngest child went off to school, she decided to get a part-time retail job. And she enjoyed the job, got her out every day, earned a little money on her own. Well, her husband was a little bit older than her, and he had worked at the company for 40 years and decided to retire. And she wanted to continue working, but he saw that as sort of, infringing on his time we should be traveling, we should do this, who knows how long we're going to live. So he kind of was on her to like, you need to quit that job. We don't need that job. We're doing fine. So she eventually quit that job, and they did do some traveling, and they had some fun, and spent time with the grandkids and so forth. But it didn't take much long later that he got cancer, and then her husband died. And so suddenly she's in this place where she had sort of given up her career. A lot of time had gone by, lost all her connections. And I checked in with her a little while after her husband died. And I said, gee, Jane, how are you doing? And she said, I wish I'd never quit that job. And now I'm just too old to go back. They never take me. I got to tell you, Paul, this retirement is for the birds. Another story is Sue. Sue had spent many years in education. She had always worked. She said to me, gee, Paul, I've been working since I was 19 years old, and now I'm in this place where I'm retired. And I asked how her day went. And she said, well, I looked and compared to my husband. He was older. He had retired much earlier than her, and he had been pushing her for several years to retire so they could travel and so forth. She said, but the difference is when he left, he started a consulting practice back in through his company. He also was an adjunct professor at a local school. He said, I didn't have those options. And so I just retired. We get up in the morning and he knows what he's going to do and he's out the door. I, on the other hand, think I've got a few things to do that day. And I look and the clock says it's 3. And I ask myself, boy, what have I done today? Not so much. Fred was another gentleman that I had met a number of years ago. He was an engineer. He had retired and he moved to Cape Cod. His son owned a home there as a second home, and so Fred became the caretaker. I met Fred because I actually bought that home from his son. And I was there in a home inspection, and Fred happened to show me, he said, with great pride, how he explained it. After he retired, he was taking care of the property, showed the flowers and the trees and so forth that he'd taken care of. And then he turned to me and he said, Paul, after you buy this place, I guess I'll be out of a job. And of course, I wasn't expecting that sort of response. And it just showed to me that, here's a situation where someone had come up with sort of one idea of what he was going to do after he retired. And sometimes things change, and if you don't have a backup plan, you can really feel lost. So one way I think of a retirement journey is you have to start somewhere. And one place I ask people is to start thinking about exploring your life. Where are you now in your life so that you can help shape your future? Another idea I like to share is all of us had some sort of journey. We go on journeys all the time. Perhaps you left your home this morning and you knew you had to go to your office and you know your commute. And if you don't know where you were going today, you have GPS to help you. So that's a journey, right? But a transition or retirement journey is actually very different. You start with the ending. You know you're going to leave. You know you're going to, if you own a business, sell your business. Perhaps you've already done so. And you know you need to create some sort of new beginning, but you haven't really figured that out yet. And so that can cause a tremendous amount of anxiety. So transitions start with the end and they end with the beginning. And where people get stuck is in here. If they don't think completely and make robust decisions, they can end up sort of getting stuck, bouncing back between their old life and a new life they wish to start. Another question is around purpose. Most of us get a sense of purpose from our work, our career, our business, as it were. And if you're going to leave that world, or for those of you advisors, if you're talking to your clients about leaving that world, in many cases you're asking them or they're experiencing this sudden lack of purpose in their life. Why am I here? And for those who wonder, why is that important? Well, here's a study done out of the University of Wisconsin, and they studied people over 14 years. And what they found is that over this time period, people who reported living with a sense of purpose and had good personal connections in their life, they were generally alive at the end of the study. But if during the course of 14 years, The participants reported having a lower sense of purpose or fewer positive relations. Most of those people were dead. So it's now been proven having a sense of purpose can actually save your life. Now, of course, we're not the only people who talk about this. I'll let you read what you see here, but just want to share a story about Lee Iacocca. Many of you, of course, are familiar with him as the man who came in as the new CEO of Chrysler and saved Chrysler in the 1980s. Well, before he joined Chrysler, he was actually the head of Ford, and he was responsible for the launch of the Mustang, which was the most successful launch of any automobile in automobile history. So a short time after that launch and all the excitement that went with that, Mr. Ford, who was chairman of Ford Motor, called Mr. Iacocca in and said, "Lee, I called you in this morning because I'm firing you." Iacocca was stunned. "Why on earth would you be firing me? We've just had the greatest launch of any automobile in our history, in fact, in the history of the American automobile industry until that point. Why?" And Mr. Ford said, "Because I just don't like you." So Iacocca told this story years later, right? And interestingly enough, although he was able to, land at Chrysler relatively quickly, he experienced this sort of, roof caving in. And yet, it happened to him again. After he actually retired from Chrysler, he didn't actually have a plan. It was just sort of time to retire. And as you read there, that's how he felt about it. And so people have this sense that it can just work out when a lot of people struggle. And Peter Drucker, who's one of the founders of management thinking, has this great quote. "There is one prerequisite to managing the second half of your life. You must begin working on it long before you enter it." So the question I ask is how people don't transition well. Well, there's an R&D method, the I'll just see what happens method, and the hyper-focus on one thing. So R&D doesn't stand for research and development, but rather repress and deny. If I don't think about leaving, right? If I don't see it, if I don't hear it, if I don't talk about it, well, it won't happen. Perhaps people who said, "I don't want to think about retiring." This is very common in business owners in particular, high-level professionals, perhaps lawyers, accountants, and so forth. Well, not thinking about it doesn't change that fact. It's like, I don't want to think about death. Well, personally, I want to spend a lot of time thinking about it, and yet it's reality. We have to. Then, of course, there's people who say, "Well, I'll just take a leap. I'll just see what happens." Well, this guy had that thought, right? And the question I ask people is, if you're going to take a leap, wouldn't you be better off with a parachute than, a handkerchief? And that's kind of the business we're in. We help people create their own parachute. Then, of course, there's that guy. And that guy can be male, woman, female, doesn't matter. And the person who hyper-focuses on one thing. It could be the golfing, the gardening, the fishing, the grandchildren, the sewing, you fill in the blank. I was sort of inspired to talk about this when my business partner relayed a story of how he had gone to his fraternity reunion. Many years later, most of the people around the table had retired because he graduated from college in the 60s. And everyone was sort of sharing their little stories. And then this one guy who had a very successful career proceeded to just bore everyone at the table talking about his lawn, how great it was, how he cared for it, and this and that, and on and on. And everyone at the table was like, God. Well, he stopped talking about the lawn. But you see, he had replaced his passion for his work, right? His sense of purpose working with taking care of the lawn. I was at a conference one time, and there was a CEO who had left the business, and he thought he was going to retire, and he said, "I knew I might get bored in retirement, but I knew I needed to do something else when I started to sound boring." So what is the golden years? So here's a fun fact. The golden years is an invented term, and it was invented by a man named Del Webb. And he used this term as a mean to explain what a retirement community was. Del Webb built some of the first and continues to build retirement communities throughout the U.S. You see, what happened is when he had this first concept of these homes, which were sort of separate from everyone else, the 55 and up, age 55 and up, that was really new 50 years ago. People, why do you need a retirement community? Don't you sort of live in the home you're in? And so he needed to create a lifestyle, the rocking chair lifestyle, the golfing lifestyle, you fill in the name, the gardening lifestyle. Whatever it is, it's leisure and recreational. It's not stress. It's not about purpose. It's just about letting go, having fun. And it was very successful, particularly with the people who had survived the Depression and World War II. This idea of after all this stress and hard work, you're going to get a few short years to retire. And then a funny thing happened. We started living a lot longer. And so this golden years started to become not so golden. And now as the boomers who are, I'm on the younger age group, I'm 55, my business partner is 71, so we're sort of the alpha and the omega of this generation. We hear this concept of the golden years, and we've seen and taken care of our aging parents and saying, boy, sitting around a rocking chair, that doesn't sound like a life for me. And I don't really know what else to do, so I guess I'll just keep working, And sadly, there are some people who take it to the extreme, and particularly, business owners are famous for this, and they're saying, well, I guess I'll just die at my desk. Lawyers just die at their desk. Well, there's a problem with that. And this is a visual that I would ask you to hold in your mind if you're one of those people or you have friends or family or clients who do. And this is the image I ask you to think about. This is dying at your desk. Okay? What a handsome guy, right? Beautiful tie, beautiful table, nice chair. But, it's kind of ridiculous. But the question to ask, all right, of yourself, if this is how you're thinking, or of your clients or friends, of how they're thinking, is dying at your desk the best that you can do with the rest of your life? So let me repeat that. Is dying at your desk the best that you can do with the rest of your life? I sure hope not. I sure hope the time, this gift of time that we've been given through just longevity, medicine, better diet, etc. We're all living well into our 70s, 80s, and beyond. That's what the numbers say. How are you going to maximize this gift we've been given? I hope it's not that. So here are some other numbers. There's all sorts of financial numbers out there. If you own a business, all sorts of business. But this was a study done a short time ago, and they asked a group of people, have you saved enough money? Well, about 70% of all the respondents said, nope, I haven't saved enough. Now, this is a lot of ages. In this particular group, most people considered their planned retirement age at about 63. That was the average. So of all people in the study, about 45% agreed, that, I'm going to have to keep working past this average age. However, as people got older, they were more likely to say, I'm going to keep working, or I'll have to keep working. So it was some combination of, I haven't saved enough, or the whole idea of the golden years doesn't sound too exciting to me, so I'm going to keep working. And so on the one hand, if there's the financial advisors are tuning in saying, well, this is a problem because how do I get people motivated to save enough money? Conversely, a number of these people are going to have to keep working in some capacity because they haven't saved enough money. And then, of course, there's this other biological clock. The women listening today are laughing and saying, well, we've had a biological clock, so I'm glad the men share one with us. And this came to me from a friend in the life insurance industry. And in that industry, they study, obviously, how long people live and what happens to them. And typically at about age 75, people just start getting sick. And I was talking to him and I said, gee, Ken, you have this great business, why are you thinking of retiring? He said, because I'm in my 60s and I know I've got another 7 to 10 years of good health if I take care of myself. But I know, and I've seen the numbers, I've seen the actuarial tables in my industry. I'm going to start wearing out, and I want to have time now. I want my balance of work and fun and travel and family. All right. I'm not going to be 60 hours a week, nose to the grindstone anymore, because he knows this clock is ahead of him. So you have to have this balance of, well, I guess I'll keep working and maybe I'll make time for myself before the clock runs out. Now, when people who do choose to retire or sell their companies and they haven't really thought through this, all right, you can end up with some pretty unhappy situations. So, Velcro husband is a term that I like to use where, a woman is sort of the CEO of the house and her husband who, had his career or maybe even was the CEO, all of a sudden he's home and you get sort of the clash of the titans. All right. And very quickly, the husband is likely to learn that, he doesn't run the house. And then conversely, because of that, he may become very dependent. All right. He has lost a lot of his social connections. He's now depending on his wife and ends up sort of sticking to her like Velcro, which is going to definitely drive her crazy. I know somebody who, retired, a spouse works part-time from home, and all of a sudden, she's trying to get her work done, and, he's wandering around, interrupting her, driving her crazy. All right. Not a recipe for happiness. Now, those of us been married know, you marry for better or for worse. Well, you didn't marry for lunch. All right. It's a story I like to share. Tip O'Neill, who was a Speaker of the House in the United States, when he chose to retire from Congress, his wife sat him down and said, I've been married to you for 40 years and I love you, but guess what? I didn't marry you for lunch, so you better plan on getting out of the house every day. So he decided to go get a little office downtown somewhere where he could get out and be with friends and colleagues and so forth, and make sure he had lunch date every day. Tragically, and we can see it in the newspapers on a daily basis, addiction and dependencies are growing rapidly in all generations, and in particular they're sort of spiking for the 55 and up crowd, in many ways because we feel people are not dealing with, creating a sense of common values and so forth, and not digging into who they are at this stage of life, or perhaps they've left and haven't really thought completely about the kind of person they want to be. Widows refers to the literal widows that happen in one's life, but there are also widows who are the unhappy spouse of the runner, the golfer, the fisherman, you name it. Okay. And, I know one person who said to me, my husband took up running in his 50s, which is great because he's, much healthier than he used to be. But the problem is every other weekend we're at a 10K or a 5K or a half marathon, and I've become his support team. I don't remember signing up for that. So all of this can lead to a lot of unnecessary stress, a lot of spouses who are being driven crazy by each other because they're not communicating what they really want. Now you see MLS, and while most people will think that the multiple listing service about selling one's house, what it means to us is married living separately. And it's very common for spouses to be different ages. One will retire earlier for a variety of reasons, and may even move to the retirement home, the retirement community, I should say. The other person is let's say they're in the East and they're continuing to work because they need to save more money, or they need to find a replacement, or maybe they need to do something with their business. And the other partner is out quote unquote having a great time. Well, meanwhile, they are slowly physically separating and emotionally separating, and very sadly, that can often end up in gray divorce. Gray meaning the color of one's hair. So here's a statistic. This was a study done in 2009 at Bowling Green State University in Ohio, and they were looking at divorce rates. And what they found is the divorce rate for 20 years has essentially doubled. So in 1990, about 10% of all divorces in the United States were age 50 plus. But by 2009, it was 25%. And the researchers had projected that by 2030, that could be as much as 30 to 35% of all divorces. And so what's slowly happening is long-term marriages, people who are married in their, now living into their 50s, 60s, have been married for a long time, are divorcing at a similar rate to people who have young marriages, people who are getting married in their 20s. And our belief is that's because people are not creating a new sense of outlook, a new outlook, and a common set of values that how they want to live their life. Because you're more likely to spend time and enjoy the time you spend with your spouse or partner or friends and family if you're sharing outlooks and values. And so as we look at these retirement choices, we see the traditional, which is often known as the golden years. And for people who reject that, the alternative was, okay, well, I guess I'll keep working, dying at my desk. And the question we ask is there a third way? And if there is, what needs to happen for this third way to evolve? And the first thing is we need to evolve a new way of thinking. So many of you have seen this slide before where, the pessimists look at this and say, oh, the glass is half empty. And the optimists look at this and say, oh, the glass is half full. And we say you need to think of it in a new way. You see, the glass is perfect. It's perfectly half full of air and perfectly half full of wine. It's in balance. And that's what more people are seeking, what we see and what we certainly recommend is creating a more balanced life, which starts with a more balanced way of thinking. It's not just the golden years versus keeping working. So we ask people to look at 5, ways or how they might want to live their life, aspects of their life, and addressing psychological issues that are perhaps holding them back from making change, emotional issues that are holding them back, the intellectual, how they're thinking about the process of this stage of their life, whether they're leaving or so forth, what they're doing for a sense of spirituality in their life. And then, of course, there's a lifestyle, which is really sort of the outward manifestation of who you are, is, where you live and what you do and what you're reading and how you keep yourself healthy. So these 5 areas are where we help people get prepared as this new life, this new chapter of life. These are 7 steps that we help people figure out, follow rather, when they're making major decisions. And our process involves a tremendous number of decisions people are making because leaving one's career or leaving one's business is, for most people, one of the biggest decisions they will ever make. So we help people learn to expand their thinking beyond sort of either or. We help them look for themselves as a whole person, the right brain and the left brain. Think about the balanced approach, right, on what's going on next. Creating a spectrum of options, using a whole system approach, which really involves not just how you think, but how you feel about things, how your 5 senses, as it were. And ultimately, to go deeper, don't just stop with this binary choice of, I'll either do this or I'll either do that. Look at the options and then go deep into them. Start making scenario planning of what will it be like to live that way? What will it be like to live in that place? What will it be like to experience this activity? What will it be like to spend this amount of time with my spouse, my partner, my family? And then ultimately you have to take meaningful action, because if you create ideas and you do brainstorming and you write down the plan, but you don't act on it, really you haven't created a plan for how you can live your life. You've really just created a plan for what is your dream. So we have a whole series of exercises, and these are sort of 2 parts of a couple of different exercises. So one is if you take a sheet of paper out and the question is you're starting to experience, who am I? But it start with the words outside of work. So outside of work, what do I enjoy doing? Outside of work, what gives my life meaning? Outside of work, what do I honor and respect myself for? And we have many questions beyond that. But if you start with those 3, if you write those down, and for those of you who can't write it down, you'll get a recording tomorrow, I promise, and you'll have that. You'll start to get a sense of who you are and how people appreciate you and how you appreciate yourself beyond work. The second part of the exercise involves what we call life transitions. So we've all had many transitions in our life. We may have gone to high school and graduated and gone on to something else. When you did that, write down roughly the age, if you can't remember your age, what the year, and what lesson did you learn? What did you learn when you left college? How What did you learn about starting a career? What did you learn about starting a business? What did you learn about leaving a business? What did you learn from getting married? How did you change? Perhaps you're going from being single to getting married to being single again, to not being a parent to being a parent. And think through 2, 3, as many events as you can, roughly your age or the year that this particular transition happened. And most importantly, what lesson did you learn? And as you go through these exercises, you'll start to get a sense of you have the ability to go through transitions because you have, and you can survive. Learn from those and apply that to this next transition. Or if you're an advisor tuning in today, helping your client get ready. So this in many ways is our big picture that we like to share with people. All right, we call it a framework for purposeful living. And what this consists of is 10 different aspects of one life. So you need to keep yourself physically healthy. If you're mid-50s, it doesn't matter, late 60s, you're probably going to have, if you're in decent physical shape today, non-smoking, another 20 or 30 years of life ahead of you. So we encourage people to think about how you're going to keep yourself physically healthy so that you can enjoy or get the most out of this next great chapter. You have to keep your brain engaged, all right? And sorry, folks, but crosswords and Sudoku, not going to do it. You have to think about languages and reading and book clubs and other ways to keep that brain engaged. Some people take it to the next step, and they not only think about going to classes, they think about teaching. Now, of course, recreational and creative, it's what a lot of people think about in this next stage of life, golf, gardening, fishing, you name it. But we challenge people to think about art, music, dance, or poetry. Right? I have an aunt who in her 70s started participating in poetry slams. She'd always sort of done poetry when she was younger, and it was fantastic. Right? What an amazing activity, get up there in front of a whole group of people, all right, and speak your poetry. For those of us with spouses and partners, as I talked about earlier, it's really important that you end up creating some activities that you and your spouse both enjoy so you maintain that connection. Right? Activities with families kind of sounds easy to understand, but the simple reality is for those of us who have taken care of aging parents, we know what that's like. And if you take care of your family, or the people you consider family, or perhaps it's friends and so forth, as you go through life, then maybe you can depend on them helping you out the way you've helped others. Residence is an enormously important question. Where do we live? My wife and I are continually going through this exercise of we have this really big house that was great for raising our kids. The kids are out of the house. Where do we go next? All right. You have to think through this. For people of means who have second homes, they may have a retirement community. Are they going to move there full time? Can they afford to have, 2 residences? Maybe one of them needs to be downsized. Maybe one of them needs to be sold. These are really important questions that we need to think very robustly about. Most of us get as much as 80% of our social connections through work. Well, if you're going to retire, you're going to leave your company or sell your company, you're going to be leaving 80% of your social connections behind. So you've got to think about how you're going to create new social connections. This is an opportunity to experience spirituality, or perhaps if you follow a faith tradition, deepen that faith tradition. We don't ever preach any particular faith tradition, but I believe that what separates human beings from all the other critters on earth is we actually ask questions like, why am I here? And spirituality or faith is an opportunity to help answer some of those questions. Some people get that from walking on a beach or walking in the woods, or frankly, walking down a fairway on a golf course. And others feel more comfortable in the tradition of a church or a temple and so forth. The last area we encourage people to look at is work. And of course, volunteerism, giving of one's time or one's money, it's very common that people might do this at this stage of life. But we challenge people to think about income-producing work, and that's a very purposefully chosen phrase. For some people, it is a job. For some people, it's downsizing their job in some form, or it's getting a part-time. For others, it's a small business or a consulting practice. For some, it's some combination of those. But we encourage people to look in all of these areas, right, and really develop plans for this, to brainstorm, make choices, fine-tune them, and make sure that they all fit. And when they do all fit, that is when people can have this greater sense of purpose. It's like, I have replaced what my old life with this new life, which keeps me busy, but also gives me a sense of meaning. So in terms of next steps, before we conclude here, for those of you who are interested, we have programs of self-reflection, exploring your life, shaping your future. That's for all the career folks. What's next? Self-assessments for business owners. We have some workshops, half-day workshops, 2-day workshops. And then we also have private coaching, half-day coaching, multiple session coaching over many weeks and months. I won't get into all those details. I will say that we have trained a group of people, different parts of the world, US, Canada, Australia, UK, and Australia, to deliver our programs. So if you go to our website, theplatinumyears.com, you can learn about our programs, and you can find some of our coaches and consultants. Also, I want to let you know about a new book called 7 Principles for Living with Authenticity. It's about discovering your true self when facing life changes. And this is by Jack Beauregard, our founder. And what we learn here in this book is an opportunity for people, not just so much retirement, but really whenever you're facing a major change. This can appeal to someone of any age, whether it is divorce or job loss or death of a loved one. I recently gave this book to someone whose daughter in her 20s lost her life partner to a tragic bicycle accident. So really hoping that these principles, which is what Jack evolved out of his research at Harvard Divinity School about how to find out who you really are, if you will, for whatever stage of life. And it's through that process that will help carry you through whatever challenge you're facing right now. You can download chapter 1 of this book for free on our homepage, theplatinumyears.com. So as we wrap up here, we just want to share this photo, which I think sort of in many ways represents what we try to talk about with people. And it really represents the 3 paths forward. So the path to the left, the nice, smooth, somewhat boring path, that represents the golden years, traditional retirement. You kind of know what's going to happen, not many surprises there. You just sort of go down that road. For those who reject that sort of boring path, and they can't think of anything else, well, they'll just go to keep working or dying at their desk. And that's sort of this rutted road of dying at your desk. But what we challenge people is this middle path. You can't quite see where it is right now. But if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to think more seriously about who you are, or what I call creating the next version of me, this can be some of the most wonderful experience of your life, and you can end up with plans for a future or a more purposeful, meaningful life that can help you feel that you're living the best 10, 20, or 30 years of your life. So thank you very much for listening. This is our website, theplatinumyears.com. For those of you who are advisors, we have a discussion next week at the same time, Wednesday of next week, about our programs for advisors and if they might wish to learn about them. And I'll be sending out some more information on our list. This is how you can reach me, Paul Cronin. I'm the COO, Platinum Years. Paul at theplatinumyears.com, and this is my phone number. I'm in the greater Boston area. And if you wanted to talk to Jack, who is the author and founder of our business, this is how you can reach him. So I did promise to answer questions if any came up, so I'm going to just give everyone a moment to think about that. I don't see any right now, but I'll just hang on here just a sec. And if you don't have any right now or can't think of any right now, that's fine. You can always just send me an email here. There is a question box down below. Just click that. You can type in your question and I'll try to answer that. Or as I say, feel free to email me later. I know some of the questions I get, in terms of the programs, how do the programs of self-reflection work? Those are really 3 elements. There's a online questionnaire, and then one of our books accompanies that. That's printed and shipped out to you. And then there is some kind of a workbook, guidebook, that's usually 20 to 30 pages of more exercises. So it's an opportunity to help someone really explore where they are in their life, create some goals about what kind of transition they might want as they move from the work world to perhaps the retirement world, or leaving their business and moving on to something else. And then it's grounded in a book. One book, as you saw there earlier, is called 7 Principles for Living with Authenticity, and that relates to the Explore program. And the other book is called Finding a New Owner, which Jack wrote 5 years ago, and that's geared strictly towards business owners. Just checking one more time on questions here. I don't see any. Okay. So I guess at this point, what I'm going to do is wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for joining today. And once again, if you do have questions, just let me know, paul@theplatinaumyears.com, or you can reach me here in the States at 978-749-9546. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.